Thursday night, 6:15 p.m. I was the only one left in the internal audit department. My computer screen flickered with missing data fields, altered dates, and multi-million-dollar contracts approved without mandatory compliance certifications. This should have been routine paperwork, but I knew I'd just touched the company's live wire. And from the moment the new vice president mocked me in front of the entire leadership team, I'd decided if they thought I was paranoid, I'd show them what a real nightmare looked like. My name is Madeline Pierce, 38 years old, senior auditor at Stellar Path Systems Internal Controls Department in downtown Denver. I'd been with the company for 12 years, long enough to know the rhythm of its heartbeat, the pattern of its breathing. That Thursday evening, as the October sun painted the Rocky Mountains orange through our floor-to-ceiling windows, I sat alone in an office designed for 20 people, staring at vendor files that made my skin crawl. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting harsh shadows across stacks of procurement documents. The coffee maker in the break room had long since switched to its energy-saving mode, its red light blinking like a distant warning. I could smell the lingering scent of someone's microwave dinner curry, maybe mixing with the sterile office air conditioning that never quite shut off, even after hours. I pulled up another vendor file, TechBridge Solutions, approved just 3 days ago for a $7.2 million infrastructure contract. My fingers traced across the screen, checking each required field. Business license uploaded after contract signing. Insurance certification dated 2 weeks past the procurement deadline. Federal compliance attestation missing entirely. The modification log showed someone had accessed these files at 11:47 p.m. the previous Tuesday, well after the approval had gone through. This wasn't sloppiness. I'd seen sloppy. Sloppy was forgetting to check a box, mistyping a date, scanning the wrong page. This was surgical. Someone had deliberately pushed these contracts through, then attempted to backfill the documentation, hoping the audit trail would blur in the system's automatic archives after 30 days. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad, old school, but untraceable in our digital tracking system. Started writing vendor name, contract value, missing documents, modification timestamps, my handwriting, usually neat and controlled, grew sharper with each entry. TechBridge Solutions, Meridian Logistics, North Point Consulting, 12 vendors in total, all approved within the last 6 weeks, collective value north of $40 million. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Each vendor had just enough documentation to pass a cursory review: a business name, a tax ID, a contact person. But dig deeper, and the facades crumbled. Physical addresses that led to virtual offices, phone numbers that rang to voicemail boxes that were always full, professional references from companies that had dissolved years ago. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the one the company had bought after the workplace wellness audit, and felt its mesh backing conform to my spine. Outside, the city lights were beginning to flicker on, transforming Denver's skyline into a constellation of human ambition. Somewhere in this building, someone was betting I wouldn't notice, or worse, that I'd notice but stay quiet. I stood up, walked to the printer, one of those massive industrial ones that could handle thousands of pages without breaking a sweat, and started the process. Print everything, every contract, every modification log, every metadata trail that showed who touched what and when. The machine churned to life, its mechanical rhythm filling the empty office like a war drum. As pages accumulated in the output tray, I thought about my mortgage, my daughter's college fund, the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years. Then I thought about the FBI's whistleblower hotline number I'd memorized but never called. The printer kept running. By 8:30 p.m., I had 317 pages sorted into manila folders, each labeled with sticky notes in my own coded system. I locked them in my personal filing cabinet, the one I'd bought myself, with my own money, with a key only I possessed. Then I pulled out a flash drive from my purse, one of those tiny ones that could hide anywhere, and started the downloads. The intuition that had served me through more than a decade of audit work wasn't just whispering anymore, it was screaming. This wasn't just fraud. This was systematic, organized, and executed by someone who understood our controls well enough to dance between them. Someone on the inside, someone with authority. I finished the downloads at 9:23 p.m., saved everything to my personal cloud storage using my phone's hotspot instead of company Wi-Fi, then cleared my browser history and cache. Probably unnecessary, but in my world, paranoia was just another word for thoroughness. As I gathered my things to leave, I looked back at my desk, at the building that had been my second home for over a decade. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, but I knew, with the certainty that comes from years of following paper trails to their ugly conclusions, that nothing would ever be the same. The war hadn't been declared yet, but I'd just finished loading my weapons. Ethan Klein arrived on a Monday morning in November, 2 weeks after my discovery. He swept into Stellar Path Systems like he owned the place, which, given his new title of Vice President of Operations, he practically did. 6'2", prematurely silver hair that looked deliberately styled that way, custom-tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He had that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been told no in any meaningful way. The all-hands meeting to introduce him was held in the main conference room, the one with the view of the mountains. Our CEO, Patricia Hoffman, practically glowed as she introduced him. Ethan comes to us from Nexus Dynamics, where he increased operational efficiency by 37% in just 18 months. He's exactly what Stellar Path needs to break through to the next level. Ethan took the microphone with practiced ease, his smile calibrated to seem both professional and approachable. Thank you, Patricia. I'm thrilled to be here. Now, I know change can be uncomfortable, but comfort is the enemy of growth. Some of you might find my methods unconventional, but I promise you, we're going to transform this company together. His eyes swept the room and landed on me for just a moment. I kept my expression neutral, the way I'd learned to do during contentious audit meetings, but something in his gaze made my skin prickle. It was the look of someone cataloging assets and liabilities, and I had the distinct feeling I'd just been sorted into the wrong column. The changes started immediately. Within his first week, Ethan restructured the approval process for vendor contracts. We're eliminating redundancies, he announced in an email that went to all department heads. Legal review will now be concurrent with, not prior to, initial approval. We're not going to let paperwork slow down progress. I read that email 3 times, each reading making my stomach tighter. Concurrent legal review meant contracts could be signed before lawyers even saw them. It was like removing the brakes from a car to make it go faster. 2 weeks into his tenure, Ethan called a meeting with all department heads. I watched from my seat as he presented his Innovation Through Acceleration initiative. Slide after slide of buzzwords and cherry-picked metrics. Our competitors are moving at light speed, he said, clicking his presenter remote with theatrical flair. Our old processes are anchors dragging us down. When he reached the slide about vendor procurement, I couldn't stay silent. These safeguards exist for a reason, I said, my voice cutting through his momentum. Federal compliance isn't optional. It's legally mandated. The room went quiet. Ethan's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. Madeline, write internal audit. He said my department like it was something he'd stepped in. I appreciate your concern, but perhaps you could schedule some time with my assistant to discuss these worries privately. We don't want to bog down the entire leadership team with, he paused, searching for the word, minutiae. A few people chuckled. Harold from sales actually laughed out loud. I felt heat rise to my face but kept my voice steady. Federal prosecution isn't minutia. No one's talking about prosecution, Ethan said, his tone suggesting I was being hysterical. We're talking about modernization, moving forward, not backward, but thank you for that. Colorful perspective. After the meeting, my direct supervisor, Robert Walsh, pulled me aside. Madeline, you need to be careful. Ethan has Patricia's full support. Pick your battles. This isn't about battles, I said. It's about the law. Robert sighed, the kind of sigh that said he was too close to retirement to care. Just Keep your head down for a while. Let Ethan settle in. These hotshot VPs usually flame out in a year or two anyway. But I couldn't keep my head down. Not when I started seeing the new vendors flowing through the system. They all had something in common. They'd been fast-tracked through Ethan's new approval process. When I flagged concerns in my weekly compliance report, the reports started getting lost before they reached Patricia's desk. Then came the isolation. First, I was removed from the vendor approval email chain. Streamlining communications, Ethan's assistant explained. Then my invitation to the weekly leadership meetings was revoked. We're keeping it to essential personnel only, Robert told me, not meeting my eyes. By week 3 of Ethan's reign, I found myself excluded from strategic planning sessions, budget reviews, even the holiday party planning committee, a clear signal in corporate America that you've been marked as persona non grata. The final insult came during an all-staff meeting in early December. Ethan was presenting the quarterly results, taking credit for the explosive growth in vendor partnerships. When someone asked about compliance concerns, he actually laughed. I think some people in this company have confused caution with paranoia, he said, his eyes finding mine across the room. We can't let the fear-mongers and process-obsessed bureaucrats hold us back from greatness. The room was silent except for a few uncomfortable shifts in seats. Everyone knew who he meant. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, meeting his gaze without blinking. Inside, something cold and calculating clicked into place. If he wanted to make this personal, I'd show him what personal looked like. The systematic erasure of my professional existence began the Monday after Ethan's public humiliation. I arrived at 7:30 a.m. to find my access to the vendor management system had been temporarily restricted for system updates. The restriction would last 3 weeks, though no one else seemed affected by these mysterious updates. My email inbox, usually flooded with compliance queries and approval requests, had dwindled to a trickle. I discovered why when Harold from sales let slip over coffee that there was a new distribution list for critical procurement communications. I wasn't on it. Sorry, Madeline, he said, at least having the decency to look uncomfortable. Ethan said it was need to know only, and internal audit doesn't need to know about procurement. I kept my voice level, professional. Harold shrugged and suddenly found his phone fascinating. Tuesday brought another revelation. The weekly compliance meeting I'd run for 5 years had been rescheduled to conflict with a mandatory training session only I was required to attend. The training, adapting to change in modern corporate environments. I sat through 3 hours of condescending slides about letting go of outdated methodologies while my meeting happened without me. By Wednesday, I noticed my keycard no longer opened the executive conference room where sensitive vendor files were reviewed. Security claimed it was a system glitch. The glitch persisted for the rest of my time at Stellarpath. Thursday was when they moved my desk. I arrived to find maintenance relocating my workspace from the windowed section of the audit department to a cubicle by the supply closet. Space optimization, they called it. The new location was perfectly positioned where no one would naturally pass by, effectively making me invisible. This is ridiculous, Sandra from HR said quietly when she saw my new location. She'd been with the company almost as long as I had. You know what he's doing, right? Making me quit, I said, arranging my files in the cramped space. Are you going to... I looked at her, really looked at her. Sandra had 2 kids in college and a husband on disability. She couldn't afford to pick sides. No, I said simply. I'm not. The isolation might have broken someone else, but they'd made a critical error. They'd left me with my computer access and my filing cabinet. While they pushed me into the shadows, I used those shadows to my advantage. I started arriving at 6 a.m., before even the earliest risers. In the quiet morning hours, I documented everything, every email where I was excluded, screenshot and saved, every system access that was revoked, logged with timestamp, every meeting I was barred from, noted with attendee lists pulled from calendar invites that still synced to my phone. During lunch hours, when the office emptied, I'd walk through the procurement department with my phone recording in my pocket, legal in Colorado, as long as one party consents. I captured conversations about the new efficiency standards and how Ethan says compliance checks slow down deals. The most damning evidence came by accident. I was working late again, invisible in my supply closet corner, when I heard Ethan's voice from the neighboring department. He was on speakerphone, probably thinking the office was empty. The beauty is, by the time anyone notices, the contracts will be executed and the money transferred, he said. We just need another month, maybe 2. That auditor is neutralized. I've made sure no one takes her seriously anymore. A woman's voice responded, tinny through the speaker. And if she keeps pushing? She won't. I've seen her type before. Rule followers. They can't function when the rules stop protecting them. She'll either fall in line or quit. Either way, problem solved. I pulled out my phone and started recording, catching the last portion of their conversation. The woman mentioned 3 vendor names I recognized from my files. Ethan confirmed payment schedules that didn't match any legitimate business model I knew. Friday afternoon, I was excluded from the quarterly audit review, a meeting I had personally established 3 years earlier. Robert delivered the news with the exhaustion of someone who'd given up fighting. Ethan feels your presence might be disruptive, he said, not meeting my eyes. Disruptive, I repeated flatly. Madeline, I know this is hard. Maybe you should consider exploring other opportunities. I'd write you a glowing recommendation. I studied him. Robert had been a decent boss once, before Ethan, before the fear of losing his pension 2 years from retirement made him malleable. I'll consider it, I lied. That weekend, I sat in my home office, surrounded by printed emails, system logs, and transcribed conversations. The picture they painted was clear. Ethan wasn't just changing processes. He was systematically dismantling every control that might expose what I now suspected was a massive procurement fraud scheme. He'd isolated me, discredited me, made me invisible. But invisibility, I realized, spreading out my documentation like a general planning an attack, could be a weapon too. They thought they'd pushed me out of the game. They didn't realize I'd simply changed the rules. I opened my laptop and began typing an email I wouldn't send for another week. The recipient field remained empty for now, but I knew exactly who would eventually receive it. The subject line read, "Formal compliance concerns regarding vendor approval process." Let them think I was beaten. The best hunters knew that patience killed more prey than speed ever could. The construction of my evidence arsenal required the patience of a surgeon and the paranoia of a spy. Every morning at 5:45 a.m., I'd arrive at the office while the building was still dark except for security lights. The janitors knew me by name now, nodding as I badged in with my coffee and unremarkable canvas bag that held 3 separate USB drives, each containing identical copies of my growing collection. I developed a system. Every vendor contract approved under Ethan's new process got its own folder, physical and digital. Inside each folder, the original contract, the approval chain, the missing compliance documents, screenshots of the system logs showing post-approval modifications, and a timeline I constructed showing the impossibility of legitimate business operations within the stated timeframes. The old system, the one Ethan hadn't bothered to fully disable because he assumed no one would think to check it, became my goldmine. It still tracked back-end access logs, still recorded every modification timestamp, still held ghost copies of deleted attachments in its cache. I spent hours in that digital graveyard, exhuming evidence Ethan thought he'd buried. Northpoint Consulting was particularly interesting. Approved for a $4.8 million cloud migration contract on November 15th, but according to the back-end logs, someone had accessed the file at 11:53 p.m. on November 16th to upload a federal vendor certification dated November 10th, except the federal database, which I checked through a public FOA portal, showed Northpoint's certification had expired in August and wasn't renewed until November 20th. Time travel, apparently, was one of Ethan's innovative efficiency improvements. I printed everything in triplicate, one set locked in my filing cabinet at work, one set in a safety deposit box I rented across town, paying cash, under my maiden name. The third set stayed with me, in a fireproof safe I'd installed in my basement behind a false panel I'd learned to build from a YouTube tutorial. The digital copies lived in multiple clouds: my personal Google Drive, a Proton Mail account I'd created using a VPN, a physical server I rented under an LLC I'd formed years ago for some forgotten side project. I even mailed a USB drive to my cousin in Portland with instructions not to open it unless something happened to me melodramatic. Perhaps, but Ethan's phone conversation about neutralizing me had shifted my paranoia into overdrive. By mid-December, I had documented 43 vendors, $112 million in contracts, and over 300 compliance violations ranging from missing insurance certificates to completely fabricated federal authorization numbers. The pattern was clear: shell companies receiving massive contracts for services that showed no evidence of being delivered, all approved through Ethan's streamlined process, all with documentation mysteriously appearing after the fact. I created a master spreadsheet, color-coded by violation type: red for missing federal compliance, orange for suspicious timing, yellow for unverifiable addresses, green for confirmed shell company indicators. The spreadsheet looked like a Christmas tree from hell, more red than anything else. The metadata told its own story. User E. Klein had accessed files at suspicious hours: 11 p.m., 2 a.m., 4:30 a.m., always after approvals had gone through. User R. Walsh, my spineless supervisor, had his credentials used to authorize changes he couldn't possibly have made while he was on vacation in Cabo. Patricia Hoffman's digital signature appeared on documents during times when her calendar showed her in board meetings or traveling. I cross-referenced everything with public records: corporate registrations that led to empty lots in Delaware, business addresses that Google Street View revealed as abandoned warehouses, executive names that didn't exist on LinkedIn, Facebook, or any professional database. On December 18th, a Friday, I made my boldest move yet. I stayed until 9 p.m., waiting for the office to empty completely. Then I accessed Ethan's assistant's desk. She'd gone home sick, leaving her computer logged in, a violation of company policy that I'd normally report but today gratefully exploited. Her email contained the jackpot communication between Ethan and someone named Victoria Marsh, who appeared to control at least 7 of the shell companies. The emails were careful, coded, but the implications were clear. Payments were being routed through the vendors to offshore accounts. Ethan was getting a percentage. The amount mentioned in one email made me dizzy: $2.3 million for consultation services. I forwarded everything to my personal email, then deleted the forwarding record from the sent folder and the system logs using a script I'd learned from a cybersecurity course I'd taken last year. My hands shook as I worked, but my mind was crystal clear. By December 21st, the last day before holiday break, I had 943 pages of documentation, 62 gigabytes of digital evidence, and a timeline that showed exactly how Ethan Klein was stealing from Stellar Path Systems. I sat in my supply closet cubicle, looking at the mountain of evidence I'd assembled. Outside, the office Christmas party was in full swing. I could hear Ethan's voice booming with laughter, probably charming another executive into compliance with his schemes. I opened a new document and began typing an index, a roadmap for anyone who would eventually review this evidence. Each section meticulously labeled, each claim supported by multiple documents, each violation tied to specific federal statutes. At the top of the index, I typed "Systematic Procurement Fraud at Stellar Path Systems, a Comprehensive Documentation." Below that, in smaller text, "Compiled by Madeline Pierce, Senior Internal Auditor." And below that, the line that would eventually destroy Ethan Klein: "All evidence collected in accordance with federal whistleblower protection statutes." The war chest was complete. Now I just needed to choose my moment to deploy it. The email that would detonate Ethan's carefully constructed empire was composed with surgical precision on January 4th, the first Monday after the holiday break. I'd spent the weekend refining every word, consulting federal compliance statutes to ensure each accusation was backed by specific legal code violations. To Ethan Klein, CC Nunn BCC, Marcus Thompson, Chief Legal Counsel, subject formal compliance concerns. regarding vendor approval process. Mr. Klein. Following my systematic review of vendor contracts approved between November 1st and December 31st under the new Innovation Through Acceleration procurement process, I have identified critical compliance failures requiring immediate attention. The following vendors lack mandatory federal certifications required under 48 CFR 52.222-22, North Point Consulting Contract Number SP 2024-447, Tech Bridge Solutions Contract Number SP 2024-451, Meridian Logistics Contract SP 2024-459. I listed all 43 vendors. Additionally, post-approval modifications to vendor documentation have been made outside of approved change control procedures, in violation of both company policy and 18 U.S.C. Severish 1001 regarding false statements in federal contracting. Specific concerns include 1. 17 vendors show insurance certificates uploaded after contract execution. 2. 22 vendors have federal ID numbers that do not match IRS database records. 3. 31 vendors list physical addresses that cannot be verified. System logs indicate documentation tampering between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. on multiple occasions, per federal whistleblower provisions under 41 U.S.C. 4712. I am obligated to report these findings through appropriate channels. I am providing you this opportunity to address these concerns before escalating to external regulatory bodies. I have maintained comprehensive documentation of all identified violations and am available to review the evidence at your earliest convenience. Regards, Madeline Pierce, Senior Internal Auditor, Stellar Path Systems. I hit send at exactly 9 a.m., then watched the read receipt pop up 3 minutes later. Ethan's response came at 9:17 a.m., and it was everything I'd hoped for. To Madeline Pierce, Subject RE. Formal compliance concerns regarding vendor approval process. Madeline. Your continued obsession with undermining progress is noted. These concerns are exactly the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that keeps companies from competing in modern markets. The vendors are legitimate. The contracts are valid. Your interpretations of federal requirements are, as usual, overly conservative and borderline paranoid. I suggest you focus on your actual job instead of manufacturing crises. Or better yet, consider whether your outdated approach to business is still a good fit for Stellar Path's future. This conversation is over. Ethan Klein, Vice President of Operations. I read his response 3 times, a cold smile spreading across my face. He'd just put in writing that he was aware of the violations and choosing to ignore them. He'd dismissed federal compliance requirements as bureaucratic nonsense. He'd attempted to intimidate a whistleblower. But the masterstroke was his CC list, or rather, the lack of one. He hadn't copied legal, hadn't looped in Patricia, hadn't created any paper trail that showed he was taking the concerns seriously. His arrogance had made him sloppy. Marcus Thompson, our chief legal counsel, called my personal cell at 9:45 a.m. Madeline, I just saw your email to Ethan. We need to talk. Can you come to my office? I'll be right there, I said, already packing my evidence files. Marcus's office was on the executive floor, the one my keycard no longer accessed. His assistant had to escort me up. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. Marcus was standing by his window when I entered. His usual composure cracked. Close the door, he said quietly. I did, then set a 2-inch thick folder on his desk. Jesus Christ, Madeline. He sat down heavily, opening the folder. His face went progressively paler as he flipped through the documentation. This is... How long have you been compiling this? Since November. Everything is verified. Marcus, every single violation. He reached a page showing the offshore account routing. His hands actually trembled. Do you understand what you found? This isn't just compliance violations. This is federal wire fraud. This is conspiracy. This is prison. I know. And Ethan's response to your email. I handed him the printed copy. Marcus read it, then read it again, then put his head in his hands. He just admitted to knowing about federal violations in writing. He threatened you for reporting them. This is evidence of willful noncompliance and whistleblower retaliation. He looked up at me. You set him up. I gave him an opportunity to address legitimate concerns, I corrected. He chose to dismiss them and threaten me instead. That's on him. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying me with something between respect and fear. You know, once I report this to the board, everything changes. Ethan won't go quietly. He'll try to destroy you. He already tried, I said simply. He failed. Marcus picked up his phone. Patricia, we have an emergency. Clear your calendar. We need the entire board on a call within the hour. He paused. No, it can't wait. It's about Ethan Klein and approximately $112 million in fraudulent vendor contracts. I sat back in the leather chair, watching Denver's skyline through Marcus's window. Somewhere in this building, Ethan was probably still smugly certain he'd won. He had no idea that his dismissive email had just signed his professional death warrant. Madeline, Marcus said after hanging up, you're going to need protection, legal protection. The company will provide counsel, but you should get your own lawyer too. This is going to get ugly. I know, I said. I've already retained someone. He studied me again, that same mixture of emotions on his face. You've been planning this for a while. Since the day he